Jessica Alstrom, spiritual teacher, medical intuitive, and quantum integration specialist, answers your spiritual questions and assists you through understanding your personal process while providing tools and techniques to move swiftly through the journey back to light.
Hello and welcome to the Transcendence Podcast. This is your host, Jessica Alstrom, and I am going to do a podcast today about triggers and finding triggers and healing triggers. So today is all about shadow work. And I released a podcast a couple of weeks ago about my time travel process that is probably the fastest way to heal PTSD and emotional trauma out there. But this is another quick technique that you can use anytime you're triggered. And I wanted to kind of go into the backstory of what a trigger is, so that if you're not familiar with that term, that it'll kind of help you understand and navigate your way through the podcast a little bit. What I mean when I say trigger is, you know, when you're going about your day and everything's fine and you're in a certain vibration, and all of a sudden someone says something or doesn't do something, and or something happens in your vicinity and it immediately puts you into a lower frequency, like immediately, like you go from 60 to 0 in a couple of seconds. It could be someone's tone, it could be someone not answering a call, it could be millions and millions and millions of things. We get triggered constantly in life, and the more shadow work you do and the more PTSD clearing that you do, the less you will be triggered. And that is where we need to head as a culture, because unfortunately when we're triggered, we are not in the present moment. And when we are not in the present moment, we don't have access to our higher perspective or higher self's energy. And when we're not in the present moment, where are we going? Well, we're moving back on the timeline. And when we go back into the timeline, all we have access to is the feelings that reside in the timeline and on the timeline. And so that's why sometimes when you get triggered, it feels like a spell is washed over you and you have a hard time being conscious in your higher perspective. You have a hard time remembering all the spiritual enlightenment that you had 5 minutes ago once you're triggered. And so that is just a byproduct of you moving back on the timeline when the trigger is activated. And basically what it means is the electrical charge is ignited. And that charge is now running in the lower realms, the lower dense energy, and it's kind of like it's somebody hit a light switch and it turned that feeling back on. And it turned that feeling back on from a dormant place, which it was slumbering before. And that's why shadow work is so important for not just your spiritual journey, but for your personal development and your success in life. Because if you've listened to some of my podcasts by now, I've talked about the dark side of law of attraction, I've talked about the timeline, I've talked about ego, I've talked about twin flame relationships, I've talked about quite a few things to this point, and please reflect on all of those if you're new to my podcast. But when it comes down to it, is we're finding ourselves in this particular lifetime not necessarily here to learn about reality. We're here to clean it up. And this particular incarnation that we're in right now is not a healing lifetime, it's a healing lifetime. And so I have news for you. Every single person that you've interacted with from the second you've been born until the moment you just listened to this podcast, you are in a karmic relationship with. And what I mean by karmic relationship means is that no one on the planet is new to you. We're here in the ascension process to basically clear all of our eons and eons of darkness that's been, held on our timelines. And so the best way to clear it is to basically be walking with every single person that you've done wrong and has done wrong to you, and that you've loved and has not loved you, and unrequited love and lost connections, and There isn't anyone on the planet that you will interact with that is not somewhere karmically residing on your timeline. And you've done that specifically for your journey so that you can do a fast cleanup. Because if you were still moving into, creating new karma, it would take us a lot longer to ascend and evolve into spiritual light beings, which we're all headed. I mean, we are deep in the alchemy process of our existence right now. And so it's kind of like that rubber band effect, in order to propel the arrow forward, you've got to pull it all the way back till it gets really, really tight, and then you let it go and it launches forward. So we're technically in the phase of the arrow as far as our ascension goes on. And what that means is we've got to go way, 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 way back in order to get the momentum to really, really, really launch ahead. And that's what, 2012 basically started off as. It was starting off as that awakening point where now we're going back into an accelerated process that once we finally let go, we will accelerate very, very quickly. But you can't accelerate past your trigger points. And you can't move into manifestation that you have shadow aspects residing in, which means that you can't attract a pile of money if somewhere on your timeline you don't believe that you deserve money, or you believe that money is bad. You will literally resist it from yourself. You will push it back. And so this lifetime is what we're doing is we're making all of this subconscious and unconscious conscious again. And it feels really intense. And we've had a series of solar flares and retrogrades and eclipses that all help promote us to bring all of this up, because as electromagnetic energy, everything that is very, very dense is weighed to the bottom like an anchor. And it's deeply, deeply rooted in our vibrational, our timelines. And so in order for us to even be aware of what's still running on an energetic program frequency in the timeline, we've got to attract it into our now moment so that we can see the reflection that can ignite the emotion that's stored at a cellular level. So basically what happens is you don't even know what's stored in your subconscious. You don't even know what PTSD you have until it's triggered. So, a man that's gone off to war and has been in a series of explosions and explosions and explosions and explosions and seen, fatalities, and maybe had to take some fatalities as part of their role, they might come back into their lives and everything is peaceful and calm until that firework goes off. And then when that firework goes off, they are triggered right back to the battlefield, and they are not conscious of, what is real and what is going on, which means that they don't know whether they're under attack, because the body feels the vibration, the same frequency of an explosion, and reacts as if it's back in that same time. And that's pretty much how PTSD works. Is there's a series of triggers that happen or traumas that happened, and they're recorded deep in the unconscious, subconscious realms, and they reside there until the energy is reintroduced or restimulated. So a perfect example of it is if I was belittled as a child for being authentic, and so maybe I dive down in 3D and I, become really successful in my, financial business, and I have 3 kids and I marry the perfect guy and I have the perfect house. And as soon as I wake up to go, okay, that's not me, and I move back into my authentic phase of life, then I notice that I am completely triggered when people don't accept me as my authentic self. And that's why I always say in every podcast, it's like you can't outrun your past. You can't outrun yourself. You're going to carry the versions of yourself forward until you heal and clear all of the trauma that resides at the cellular level. And it doesn't matter what you create for yourself on the outside. If the inside is still broken or traumatized, you will keep manifesting that into your reality. And I know I've shared stories about my husband, and I'm sorry to constantly use him, but I will tell you that he's my nemesis. He is He is the person on the planet that can literally, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of that beeping for you guys. He can literally, trigger me in 2 seconds flat. And I can get pretty lost in that. And, it's like I don't have to live with my family anymore, so I'm not really triggered by my family anymore. And so in order for my soul to evolve, I'm going to manifest relationships that hold the vibration of the triggers that I need to clear. And so I don't want to run away from those relationships. I want to embrace them. I will tell you, the ones who trigger you the most are your greatest spiritual teachers. The things that trigger you and get under your skin, spiritual teacher. Okay? Because what they're doing is they're showing you where all of your energy is blocked and stuck, and it's dormant because it's not necessary for the moment, which means, have you ever noticed how good you feel when you're alone? Especially if you've been on your spiritual journey for a while and you just feel like you dance around the room and you think you're awesome and you're so happy and everything's awesome, and you're totally like in balance, and then you walk out of your house and you meet your friends for dinner, and all of a sudden you don't know who you are anymore, and it's like, what? And it's just like you're triggered. So I always say it's really easy to be enlightened when you're alone, but it's our relationships or the interactions that we live day to day that are there to show us where all of our timeline garbage is. And it's really important that we don't run away from the triggers. And it's also very important that we are with ourselves during the triggers so that we don't let ego make it about the other person. Because a trigger is someone else's projection, but it's your reflection. So they're projecting onto you something that they believe about themselves, but you're taking it as your reflection. And so they're basically hypocritically putting information out there that's triggering your PTSD, and that's a reflection of something that's hiding within you. Because honestly, with physics and quantum physics and metaphysics, you have to understand that you cannot be triggered by anything that isn't a vibrational match to something on your timeline. So if you're triggered by anything, it's alive and well on your energy field. It's alive and well in your timeline, okay? And it's just dormant, and it's still there. And that's why when I do time travel with people, they're like, oh no, my childhood was great and everything's ha ha ha. And then all of a sudden, 2 minutes later, they're bawling hysterically on the floor, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know I felt that way about that. Because your adult perspective sees your childhood much better than your child sees your childhood. Your child is very traumatized by basic events of suffering. The adult would be like, yeah, just get over it, put some dirt on it. You're all good. It's all good. I've forgiven that person. And your child is like, no, we're still in hell. And that's where the triggers are coming from, not always the childhood. Because what I've noticed is some people manage to get through their childhoods pretty unbruised. Maybe, mom and dad wasn't like super attentive, or like the rock star nurturing family, and maybe dad was a little bit emotionally unavailable because he worked, but you understood and he loved you, and then all of a sudden you manifest this relationship that just in high school or in your early 20s or 30s where literally almost destroys you, and it becomes such a form of PTSD that you can never feel about any other relationship after that relationship the same. I mean, every relationship is now tainted by the person that last hurt you. And I'm going to be doing a second Sunday channeling this Sunday on Mother's Day. And, about a week before I do this second Sunday, I start to get pretty intense downloads from, the higher perspective of myself, and basically everything that I've been channeling lately is about healing the broken heart within, and that's where the triggers are coming from. Because a broken heart is just, it's not about someone who's being broken up with, or someone who got dumped, or losing someone that you love. It's about not being seen. It's about being blamed for things that you didn't do. It's about not being allowed to be authentic. It's about unrequited love and unfulfilled destinies and unfulfilled desires. Believe it or not, when a child wants something and mom and dad say no, it's pretty heartbreaking. You know, and you've heard me talk a lot about the child, how huge things are when you're a kid. Like a cookie is like the equivalent of having a car when you're an adult, because it's all you want in the moment and it creates freedom and joy. And so things that we take for granted as adults, children literally obsess about. And it is their entire world. If you've ever seen a kid write their Christmas list or get ready for their birthday or something like that, you know how excited they are. And when we don't get the attention that we need, that's very heartbreaking. And so a lot of times what I've noticed is with triggers and doing time travel is something that you really need to like get focused on and be with and spend time and totally allow yourself to go into the depths of your own hell for a few minutes and then come out of it. And it's something that you have to be really, really patient with, because a good time travel could knock you out for the entire day. You know, I've seen it. It's actually, that's what happened in our documentary when I did it with Amber, is we did a time travel and it just kind of knocked her out for the whole day and she needed to go home and sleep. So you never know really what's going to go down with time travel. I mean, it could give you great energy, but it also could really, really wipe you out, because you are moving energy and you are changing cellular memory, and that's very, very exhausting on a cellular level for your body. Also, you've been carrying a ton of baggage with you emotionally your whole life, and when you start to let that go, it's almost like when you put down something that's really heavy and you're like, gosh, I didn't realize how heavy that was until I put it down. That's what time travel feels like. So the trigger work is a little bit different, because the trigger work is something that you literally sit down and you do pen to paper with, and it's very much about you being the private eye of your own shadow. It's you being the shadow hunter and going, okay, so I just got totally triggered by my husband and this is so not about him. So I needed to go in and I need to find out why I am being triggered by what he said. And that's pretty huge spiritual enlightenment processes we're doing here, because in order for you to be fully responsible and make everything about you takes a lot of awareness, because most people would just rather blame someone else for the trigger and be like, well, you know what, he always does this to me and he always makes me feel stupid and he doesn't see me, and that's really easy to play the victim. But when you're really going to progress on your spiritual journey and you're really going to move on your personal process, you have to make everything about you. You have to make everything about your healing, which means that if you're not triggered, it's not something you need to work through. If you're feeling neutral when someone just says, hey, you look stupid today, then that's pretty awesome progress. Because humiliation is a huge trauma on the timeline. And humiliation comes from when you're judged for being authentic, or when you're judged for something that you can't necessarily help. And when you are kind of putting yourself out there and it's not received well, humiliation is hugely associated with fear. There is so much fear and humiliation that are interlinked, just like shame and guilt are very interlinked. And grief is something that we use fear to cover up, because we don't want to feel grief, because I will tell you, grief is the emotion on the planet that we have a hard time living through. And grief is the broken heart that feels like the heart is in pieces and it's no longer basically acting as a seat of our soul. I mean, it really feels like death itself when we lose someone that we love or something that we love. And unfortunately, even when a marriage breaks up, that's considered a death, because a marriage is kind of its own consciousness. It becomes its own beingness. And when a marriage breaks up, there is a death. And both sides, whether they're aware or conscious enough to know it, they're both mourning that. And so divorce is extremely hard on kids, because it's the death of an identity of which kids were holding on to. And if you've heard me do some conscious parenting classes, you understand how important roots are for children and structure is. Not that I'm saying that you should, not follow your joy and not get divorced, because sometimes divorce is the best thing that you can do. But I'm saying that the body still mourns the loss of anything, even if it was extremely toxic. When the body loses something that it was accustomed to, whether it be the abusive boyfriend or the narcotic or the chocolate cake, the body goes through a mourning period because it has lost something. And the body deals with loss in a series of ways. And one of the most common things that I see with loss is the common cold. And people who have lost something, a job or something, they'll get a long cold, or they've lost hope and they'll get a cold, and a cold can turn into some sort of bronchial issue, and it will always end up in the lungs. And because that's where we carry grief, is in the lungs, and it feels like that elephant on your chest when we've lost something. And so the thing is this whole entire journey, this whole process of being a shadow hunter, it's all about being with your triggers, being with the blocks, being with the stuck points, being with the victim energy, being with the lack of love, being with the broken heart. And so today I want to share with you a technique that I do all the time with myself, and that I've done with many, many clients, and it really helps shift the perspective, because when you can start taking personal responsibility for your own triggers, then no one owns you anymore, and no one controls you, and no one controls your mood, and no one has the opportunity to steal your happiness ever again. So here's how it works. Is, say I'm at work and my boss asks me where my report is, and I'm late turning it in because I've been having a lot of family issues, and I'm starting to feel like that authority issue popping up, and he's kind of belittling me, and he doesn't understand what I'm trying to do at home as a mom, and he's asking me where it is, and so now I start moving into fear because I'm afraid to lose my job, and then he starts criticizing me, and so now I'm really, really triggered. And so what I would do in that moment is, instead of thinking, what a jerk, and what a a-hole and all these things, and what a, how can he do this to me, and this company's stupid, instead of doing the normal ego defense mechanism and making it about the guy not liking you, you want to sit with yourself, and maybe not right there in the moment, because you can't do it when you're completely triggered, but what you want to do is you want to make a note. And I ask everybody that I work with to carry what's called a proof journal. And a proof journal is kind of like a synchronistic journal, or a journal of things that come up during the day, because you've got to practice awareness, and you've got to practice your way out of patterns, and you've got to practice, new techniques. And so having kind of a journal to write down, I got so triggered at 3 o'clock today by so-and-so. And the thing is it's really hard to kind of brush something like that off. So you're probably going to carry that trigger for a few days. And if you're like me, feeling good is the ultimate goal of your entire day, you're not going to want to feel bad for a couple days. You don't want to bring that, bad situation that you had with dad, or with your boss, back into your home and put it on your kids and your husband. So what you would want to do is you would want to walk through your front door and be like, okay, everyone, I got to go do a little bit of work right now. I've really had a bad day, and I want to make sure that I'm not going to put all of this on everyone. And you're going to go sit down with your pen to paper, and you are going to write down and say, you can put trigger work at the top, and you're going to write down what triggered you or who triggered you. Okay, and this is really, really important, because this is going to bring you into the present moment of awareness, so that you can decipher between what is happening now and what has happened. And you're going to go very quickly back on your timeline with yourself, because pen to paper is your subconscious translation. So when you write down what is triggering, who is triggering me, I would write down, it was my boss. And what triggered me was he was questioning my authenticity. He was questioning my integrity. He was questioning my work ethic. And I would write all those things down. And I would probably start to get really angry again, because now the energy is flowing and my body is communicating the story through pen to paper. And I'm going to write down underneath that, what is the emotion that I felt when, he was going off on me. And I am going to sit with that, and I'm going to really try to find one or two emotions that really feel like they fit the feeling that I was having during that triggered moment. And I would probably, first I would say anger, and then I would also see humiliation, and I would probably even see sadness for not being seen and heard. And so I would find the one that really stood out to me, and I'm going to probably go with humiliation. And humiliation feels really, really active in my body. And so I'm going to write that down. And now here's where it gets really, really, really integrated. Because the next step is finding the reflection of the trigger, because you didn't get triggered because he was asking you about your work. You got triggered by the way you felt judged about the way he was asking you about the work. And you felt like on the spot and blindsided. And there were so many other emotions that are coming up for you now that you're starting to feel. And the next question is this is where you're going to start moving with your subconscious mind, pen to paper, back on your timeline, is you're going to say, when have I felt this way before? And you're going to write down the first memory that comes when you were humiliated. And when else did I feel this before? And when else did I feel this before? And you're going to keep writing down humiliating events, and this time, and this time, and this time, and this time. And you might hit a big one. And you might have a bawling session there for a minute. And you might go back to the 3rd grade where, you were super proud of your science project and everybody made fun of you. And you might find yourself there. And you're going to write that event. And you're going to start to see the pattern of the humiliation that you felt in the office that day is so heavily embedded into your timeline, and it's been such an apparent dormant emotion for you that this was just kind of like a volcano expression of that emotion. It needed to be set free, and so the perfect timing, the synchronistic soul contract of the boss judging you in the right moment, it basically set that emotional flood free. And that's when you really want to sit with yourself, and you want to really see all of these times when you have been humiliated. And you want to just like sink into it and really, really feel it, because you can't heal anything that you can't really, really heal or feel first. You've got to feel the pain to release the pain. And that's how we create alchemy, is we put love into all the darkness. And in order to expose the darkness, we've got to really feel it again. It doesn't mean we're going to let it sit there and eat us alive, but we're just going to start to see this heavy pattern of humiliation. And we're going to be like, wow, this is not just happening today. This has been a really, this has been a theme for me. And you want to just sit with that for a minute. We're not going to necessarily time travel all of that, but you've got it all written down, so you could definitely go and time travel all of these events that you've now found in your subconscious mind that just been popped up. But what we're going to do is we're going to take it 2 steps forward, further, and we're really going to dive into the shadow here. And this is where your ego is going to freak out, okay? Because this is where we find the reflection of the trigger. And the reflection of the trigger, the next question is, when have I humiliated others? Okay? When was I humiliating others? Now, I will tell you that you probably have never, set out to humiliate anyone. It wasn't like your goal for the day, I'm going to go humiliate so-and-so. But power of the trigger, the way of your tone, the way you made someone feel, or the neglect of someone, or leaving someone hanging, or breaking up with someone. When have you humiliated someone else? And you want to write down everything that you can think of. And it might start to flood, because you cannot be triggered by something that's not reflected by you having the other polarized effect, which means that because this is a cause and effect universe and this is a karmic relationship, nothing can ever happen to you that has not happened through you at one point. So you want to sit with that, and you want to write down all the times that you've humiliated others. And again, you might have forgiven yourself, but the thing is, it's still on your timeline, and this is the opportunity to clear it. And what you're going to notice is, as soon as you start to write down all the times where you've humiliated other people, or hurt someone, or degraded someone, or been the authority of someone, or whatever, story aligns, the charge is going to start to blow on the trigger, because you're balancing the energy. And as you balance the energy, what you're going to start to notice is that you feel better, and you're going to be like, wow, gosh, I've done some doozies. I've done, geez. You're going to start to kind of feel compassion, because you're going to start to see where the trigger is alive within you, where you've been on the other side of that humiliation as the giving, as the perpetrator. And the last and final question that you're going to find this is about the child right now. And especially when you're triggered by When you're triggered by someone's bad behavior, okay, what your inner child is feeling is your inner child is feeling like it's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. That's the thing that I hear the inner child say the most when I'm sitting in a session with someone. It's like it's on auto repeat. But what I mean by the last step is finding where the child wasn't allowed to where the child wasn't allowed to stand up for itself or have the experience. And this is what I've noticed a lot doing conscious parenting. And I hope this all ties together and it makes sense. And I hope I'm not rambling, but like what I've noticed is a lot of times is parents will come to me and they will be like, okay, so my kid really, really triggers me. And I feel bad because I don't want to be mad at my kid. I don't want to be triggered by my kid. I know that they're not doing it on purpose, but oh my gosh, that they trigger me so bad. And I'll say, well, what are they doing? And, it'll be all different things. But one of the things I've noticed is like, well, they're so lazy. And they just don't want to do this, or, they're entitled, or they don't appreciate what I've done, or they just get to do whatever they want. And all of a sudden, as they're talking, I start to hear their inner child come out. And what I'm hearing their inner child say is, it's not fair that my kids get to do what I didn't get to do when I was a kid. It's not okay that my kid gets to feel her feelings. And it really triggers me when she feels her feelings because my inner child was never allowed to feel my feelings. And so therefore it really triggers me when my kid gets to feel her feelings and gets to be lazy because I wasn't allowed to be lazy. And it really triggers me when people get to speak their truth and be authentic. And it really triggers me when people are comfortable in their own skin. And it really triggers me when people think that they can just tell me that my work is bad because you know what? I've never been allowed to judge anybody else, and I've never and all of a sudden you hear it. You hear it all come out. And you really want to find the blocked charge of the child where the child wasn't allowed to express itself in that particular trigger, which means if your child was humiliated and your child didn't get to stand up for herself, she is going to get triggered. He's going to get triggered when the humiliation pops up in the future, because there are so many aspects of that trigger where the personal power was stolen and the authentic truth was stolen and the root issues are being challenged and the sacral issues are being challenged and the third eye is shut down, and so it's kind of like very, very devastating for the child to be watching someone else live a life that they're not allowed to live. So parents and kids really trigger each other. And if your mom was triggered by you, just know that you were allowed to do something that she wasn't allowed to do, or you were authentic and she was never allowed to be authentic, or you were very loving and she wasn't loving. And so your parents' inner child is jealous of you. And I know that doesn't sound good, but it's kind of like I did this session today with a gal who is not extremely metaphysical, so I had to kind of adjust my language with her and help her to see her diabetic issue. And this is a story that I hope resonates with a lot of you because, I've been working with her for a really long time and we've made a huge amount of progress, but one of the things that she's dealing with is emotional eating. And, it's cookies, it's cakes, it's candies, it's comfort food. And she got a diagnosis this morning a couple days ago of diabetes. And, she's like, I'm driving home and I got this diagnosis with diabetes. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go eat cookies. And she looks at me and she's like, why am I trying to kill myself? And I just laughed because I said, you're not trying to kill yourself. She's like, I know I have diabetes now. And why am I going for the cookies? And so what she was asking me is, why am I not an adult? And it just made me laugh because I asked her, I said, if you walked up to my 3-year-old right now and you asked him what diabetes was, what do you think he would say? And she was like, I don't know. And I go, well, imagine if you were 3 and I asked you what diabetes were, what would you say? And she'd be like, I have no idea. I said, so your inner child does not have a clue of what diabetes is. You're not in physical pain, you haven't lost a limb, you don't have any physical consequences of the disease yet. So the child doesn't understand disease. The child just wants cookies because cookies nourish and feed the soul right now, because there's a lack of, companionship. There's a lack of understanding in your life, and there's not a lot of people who are loving and supporting you right now. And so food is is filling in the blanks. And so your child is not trying to kill you. You are not trying to kill you. Your inner child is trying to, the security blanket that is its top pick is the cookies and the candy. And the child doesn't understand disease. And so the child is the one needing the cookies and candies. And you're the adult self that's sitting there saying, the conscious self, the higher self going, we don't need cookies, right? And so you have to realize is that your inner child doesn't understand, politics. Your child doesn't understand logic. Your child doesn't understand disease. Your child doesn't understand. It knows what's not fair, who's getting more attention, what people are allowed to do that you're not allowed to do, who's got the bigger cookie, who got more rides on the swing, and, who is prettier and who is smarter and who gets more attention from mom and dad. And I mean, literally, that's the world that your inner child lives 24/7. And you can find yourself, if you just go back into today's memories, I can guarantee you can find some of those thoughts that resonate with a 6-year-old child, where maybe someone walked past you and they just looked like they had it all together, and the child within you was like, oh man, like that's not fair. Why does she get to do that? Why does he get to do that? Why does this person get to... And I will tell you, you know what triggers the inner child more than anything? Facebook. And the reason why is because everybody puts their highlights on Facebook. Nobody puts their, hey, I had a really ugly hair day. Let me put a selfie of me today with my really ugly, pimple that I have. Nobody's doing that. I mean, there are several people who post a lot of drama, but those are people who have not been seen and heard, and they need attention through drama. But most people try to put their best face on Facebook, which means that that's going to trigger you, and you're going to be like, okay, your ego's going to immediately take score. And you're going to go, man, I'm 35 years old, and someone I went to high school with is like owning some company. It's funny. I've got a story. I went to my 9th grade with several girls, and I'm friends with all of them on Facebook, and most of them are all living normal lives, except I have this one friend, and she posts pictures like every day of of herself on yachts, and she's like this high fashioned like stylist in New York, and she travels with celebrities everywhere. And I mean, even times I pop up and I'm like, wow, she really made it, and my ego's like, yeah, and you're 41 years old and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait. So Facebook is a great place to find triggers, and it's funny how the ego goes looking for it, because we're so, absent from our own work that we love to pry and stock on in other people's lives. And it's almost like we're doing it to ourselves. And, I hope social media changes. I've changed my social media quite a bit over the last couple of years and made it like absolutely nothing to do with my personal life, and just more about inspiration and posting positive, affirmations and videos, because it's like, at the end of the day, it's not a competition, and you're not here for someone else's life. But I promise you, looking at their life, your child will be so triggered if you think that they have it better than you. And then you start to manipulate and have some sort of dysfunction with time, because you think, you do the math of your age, and you're like, I'm not where I want to be, and I'm not on my spiritual journey where I want to be, and I'm not like you, and I don't have my intuition opened yet. And I'm like, you know what? That's not where you're supposed to be. Right now, you're supposed to be working on the trigger that your boyfriend just gave you. That's your spiritual work. That's your Academy Award right there, is your acting out that, and that is your entire livelihood right now. That's going to make you accelerate on your purpose. And so it is literally like the rubber band effect. You've got to pull it back, which means you got to go back. Find the personal reflection of where you have done the exact thing that you're triggered by. Because I will tell you that I work with a lot of you, and 98% of you are hypocrites. The very thing that you're pissed off at in my office is things I've watched you do, including myself. That's why you don't hear me really talk about my own triggers, because I know better to talk openly about my triggers, because I know there's probably hypocritical energy there. It's like you'll say, oh, my kid does this and this, and I'm like, you just did that yesterday. and just become aware of that, because there's no judgment in that. But the thing is if you're not going to be aware of what part you're playing in the trigger and where you have done the dirt yourself or humiliated someone yourself, then you're never really going to let the charge completely blow, because you are polarized, because you are that yin and yang, because there is light, there is also dark, and you can't just clear all of the stories where you were the victim. You've got to clear the stories where you've been the perpetrator. And so you clear and look at those stories, and then you can time travel those if you want. But this is like an investigation process of, why am I being triggered? It's never for the reasons you think. It's always coming from the past. You would never be triggered in the now moment, because the now moment is always neutral until you give it meaning. And the trigger comes from the cellular activation of the re-stimulated energy. The energy is being stimulated in your body, and all of a sudden you're going happy, doing the dishes, full-blown rage, okay? And you can go from full-blown rage to, volcano energy in 3.5 seconds. And I shared this story with my life coaching certification, and I have no problem like kind of putting my dirt out there, because I am not one of these teachers that's gonna like be on this mountain preaching everything is fantastic when I still get triggered, but I am aware enough to go, I need to clear this so that I don't feel bad for 2 weeks. Especially women, we have a tendency to really, really hold on to things. So what happened with me, and see if you can kind of follow my trigger here in my work here, is, I had a long day at work. I was working 7 days a week because we were doing a documentary, and we've been doing a lot of wonderful things. And so I finally had a Sunday off, and I was really excited to be at home because we were just moving into our new house, and I was really looking forward to unpacking and just kind of being at home and just doing all the things I wanted to do. And I walked into the kitchen that morning, and the sink was just filled to the brim with dishes. And, it was my husband and my stepkids, and because I hadn't been there. And my older girls don't live at home with me anymore, and my 9-year-old's in California, so it really wasn't my stuff. And I was so excited because I walked into this filthy kitchen and I didn't get triggered. And I was like, yes, there's soul growth right there. Woohoo! I just decided to put on some awesome music, Bluetooth it, and dance around my kitchen and make my kitchen sparkling clean, and just be grateful that I have this amazing family. And I was really, really high. And I was doing the dishes and I was singing. And, as I'm putting the dishes into the dishwasher and kind of oblivious of what's going on, all of a sudden I look, and my husband is taking a spoon from the dishwasher and throwing it into the sink very assertively. And I kind of turn the music down real quick, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And he's like, I am so sick and tired of you putting dirty dishes in the dishwasher. And you can guess it. Trigger. I went from complete joy to serious anger in 3.5 seconds. And I was just standing there kind of humiliated, what the, I'm like, I don't really kind of understand physically what's happening right now. And I looked at the spoon, and it had, that little peanut butter that was still kind of stuck to the spoon that probably wouldn't have made it through the dishwasher, to be honest. But I was like, of course, my ego went, okay, these are not even my dishes. I totally went into that kind of humiliating repatterning where I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong. And I was so angry because this was my first day off. He knew how hard I was working, and that was the thing that he was freaking out about. And so it really pissed me off. I was pretty hot. And he knew it pissed me off because I don't say anything. I've kind of worked my way out of the yelling phase, and I just kind of stood there. And I'm really trying to I'm trying to get conscious right now. And I'm really trying to be with how I really feel. And I couldn't get it. I was a spell. It was washed over me. I wanted to punch him out, to tell you the truth. And so he left the room, and he's kind of huffing and puffing around. And I just sat on the kitchen table, and I just kind of put my head down, and I was breathing. And I was like, okay, I've got to get conscious because I am not going to ruin my entire day. And so I just pulled out a pen and paper, turned the music down, and did my trigger work right then and there while I was still like adrenaline like running through my system. And what I realized in that moment was, my husband is not on his consciousness journey the way that I am. He sees spirituality very differently, very like American Indian, like just, giving back to the earth and celebrating and loving everyone and being genuine. Well, he doesn't understand cause and effect, and he doesn't really understand law of attraction. And so I don't really preach any of that to him. And so he's kind of going through something at work right now where he's being bullied, and he's doing a lot of work, and he's not getting a lot of help, and he's not really being seen for what he's doing right. He's being judged on what he's doing wrong. And that's exactly what he did to me in the kitchen, was not seeing the huge amount of work that I was doing. He pinpointed the one thing that I was doing wrong. And I just kind of sat there and I thought, oh my gosh, okay, so I'm being bullied by someone who's being bullied. And so I quickly moved into compassion when I realized that, what his inner child was just now bullying me, because I will tell you, when you get bullied, it's the cause and effect that you go bully someone else. And I've seen my 3-year-old do it. It's like he gets bullied at school and he starts bullying the pets at home. It's like you will find something smaller than you to pick on when you're being picked on. And it's unconscious, I know, it's very ego, I know, but you know what, we're human, and these are the experiences we're having, and I'm not going to keep it all spiritual all the time, because this is real life. And so as I started doing my trigger work, I got to that point where I found the emotion, and it was humiliation, and I felt judged, and I felt unappreciated, and that's what I wrote down. And so I started writing down all the times that I had not felt appreciated, and all the times where I was humiliated, and all the times. And I found a lot of them that I hadn't time traveled yet, so I put those on the notepad for later on. And then I went into my self-reflective work, and I said, when have I humiliated someone else? And, there's been times as a mom where, you're frustrated and things aren't being done around the house, and, your kids are trying to clean up and you're frustrated. And so, I found a good 5 or 10 of the times when I have done that in the past. And so I made sure that I really sat with that and let that energy go, and time traveled that for myself and time traveled that for other people that I had hurt. And when I found the energy of the inner child that wasn't the energy of it's not fair at the last step, I realized I was never allowed to behave the way that my husband gets to behave as a child. I was never allowed to be angry. I was never allowed to be frustrated. You were frustrated in my house, it was over. And you kept all that inside. And so for my husband to just kind of get pissed off at work and be able to take all of that energy home and just spread it all over the house, my inner child was so angry, because it was like, this is not fair that he just gets to walk in and vomit all of his negative energy all over us. And my child was really angry. And so I did some time travel on that, and gave my child what she needed from that, and it ended up being, I don't know, a 15-20 minute process. And he came in and was kind of like, oh gosh, she's on one, she's writing, and he knows better to bother me when I'm in the zone. And I was still a little frustrated as I got finished, but the charge was so blown. I was more frustrated that I had gotten triggered. And so I just kind of said, hey buddy, come in here and let's sit down and talk. And he was kind of like wide-eyed, because men, they do something and 5 minutes later they don't realize that they did anything. Sorry guys, but that's how you are. It doesn't linger with you guys the same way it lingers with us. And so he was kind of over it by then. And I sat him down and I'm like, I get that you're being bullied at work. I get it. I totally understand. And, you have a choice in all of that, and you're better than that. And I hope one day you see that, because I'm not trying to explain law of attraction to him. But I said, it's not okay that you bullied me because you're being bullied at work. And he just kind of looked at me like he had not even really thought about that before. And I said, I know how it feels to not be appreciated. I said, but I came home to a sink full of dishes that were not mine, and I did them anyways, and I was joyful about it because I was excited to be with the family. And I said, you kind of degraded me, and you really humiliated me just now, and you probably weren't even aware of it, but I'm a lot more sensitive with this stuff than you are. And I'm like, and it really hurt my feelings. But when I said it, I wasn't angry, I wasn't enraged, I wasn't on the timeline, I was in the present moment. Had dealt with my part in it. I had dealt with my shadow. I had worked through a couple time travels. And by the time I actually had the conversation with him, it was all about just speaking my truth and telling him who I am in this moment and taking my power back. And so it was like a full circle integration of a trigger that may seem like not a big deal, but that spoon getting thrown in the sink was humiliation, and humiliation was 1,000 times on my timeline. So you see how our triggers are valuable nuggets of spiritual release. They are so important to be aware of. And see, his projection was my reflection. He projected his bully behavior onto me because that's what was happening to him. And it was my reflection of my shadow element of hating being humiliated and not liking to be judged. So you might need to listen to this podcast a couple times because I ramble, and I apologize. But I hope this makes sense, because when you really begin to work in your own triggers and you really begin to take responsibility for the stimulated energy that's residing at a cellular level, you start to take your freedom back. And I will tell you, I had the best day after that. We had the best day after that. We laughed all day. We just had so much fun after that. I mean, it was a really 15-minute conversation, and he honestly said at the end, I'm so sorry, I didn't even realize that I was doing that, because when people project onto you, they're not conscious. They're on their timeline being triggered too when they're projecting on you. So when their bank teller's mean to you, they're not conscious. They're not doing it on purpose to hurt you. They're somewhere retracted on their timeline, and they are restimulating energy that's coming off as a charge, and you're taking it personally. And it's really hard not to take things personally when they trigger you. But their projection is your reflection, so it's your job to work on why you're being triggered. So I'm going to leave you with that today. And I hope this totally helps somewhere. I hope my stories relate to you. I know that I have a pretty common life I live. I mean, I'm just a mom, and so I have everyday problems. I have, the bills that come in the mail, and I have the kids, and I have the older kids and the babies, and I have the husband, and I have the ex-husband, and I have the family and the dysfunctional family, and I have the small groups of friends, and, I have my business. And it's like I don't live, some glamorous celebrity life of a spiritual teacher, because that's not really my highest joy. My highest joy is to have heaven on earth, and heaven on earth is relationships and family and abundance and making this work and feeling joy in this, and not feeling like I have a big hole inside of me when I have a good life. I want to be free from my past, and I want to be free from triggers. And so I really, really care about how I feel. And so I will never give up on myself, and I will never give up on any of you. And that's why I will continue to do these podcasts and answer every email, because you're important. And as you set yourself free, you can help others. And you do time travel. You can go teach other people how to do time travel. You do trigger work. You can help other people through their trigger work. You just can't force your spiritual journey on anyone else. And you have to realize that if I can make my marriage work when I have a husband that is nowhere in the belief system of anything I teach, if I can make this work, then, we can make anything work, because he thinks I'm a witch. He thinks I'm and I'm joking, of course, but he doesn't have a clue of what I do. And when I start talking about things like time travel, he just says, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. And so we just don't have that type of relationship. And I don't need that from him, because what I need emotionally, I give to myself. And so he feeds my soul in other ways, companionship and parenting and fun and human stuff, And so it's a very good blend. And is it perfect all the time? No, but the reason why I stay and love him so much is because he is my nemesis. He is my greatest trigger. And inside of him is everything that is my darkness that I need to clear. And so it's like I love him and appreciate him for that. And so I want to leave you with that today. And And hopefully this can help you through some of your everyday triggers that are happening and some of your bigger triggers. You can do this with everything and anything. And it's time to take your power back because you deserve it. And you deserve to let go of shame and guilt and let go of all of the trauma and have a happy life. You're here for joy. And so I'm going to leave you with that and start your trigger work.
Thank you for joining Jessica on this transcending episode. Email us directly at jessicaalstrom@gmail.com with your questions and personal challenges you would like addressed on the show. And join us on next week's podcast. You are not alone, and remember, your higher self speaks to you through people, places, circumstances, and events.